Hey guys, what's up? It is the one and only RJ21 here, and today I'm going to be recapping the events of Week 5 of Big Brother Canada 12 and giving my updated power rankings. Week 5 starts off with the What's Shakin' HOH competition. Basically, each house guest had to slide milkshakes down a lane to score points. Whoever scores the most points with their 3 milkshakes would become the new head of household. Ultimately, Avery wins this competition, winning her first head of household of the season. Now, Avery quickly reaffirms to all of the women that a woman is not going home this week, leaving her with quite a few options to go after. Avery most likely is considering Elijah, Matthew, Tola, and Todd as her possible nominees. Avery initially wants to make a big move to get out one of the strong guys and wants to nominate Matthew and Tola. But after having some conversations to cool her head down and to have her being a bit more reasonable and a bit more logical, Avery decides that maybe it's not the best move to go after the big dogs right off the bat, but she still wants to ensure that to a certain extent, Anthony's side is going to take a shot. So at the nomination ceremony, Avery nominates Elijah and Tola, with Elijah being the primary target and Tola being the secondary target, because Elijah stirred up a lot of trouble last week and Avery didn't want to fully commit to targeting Anthony's side, but still wanted to keep that option available. Now, Elijah and Tola, alongside Bayleigh, Victoria, and Lexus, were all selected to compete in the power veto competition. In the brush away veto competition, house guests had to essentially collect teeth, wash them, and then stack them on a tiny pedestal. The first person to collect and successfully stack all 25 of their teeth without them falling over would win the power veto and a gift of $5,000 from the sponsor of the competition, Sonicare. Ultimately, the competition was close, but Tola came out on top, winning the power veto. With a replacement nominee being evident, as it's pretty expected Tola is going to use the power veto to save himself, Avery needs to weigh out her options about who to put up as the replacement nominee. Avery fairly quickly comes to the realization that she's going to have to put up Matthew, despite her having a very solid one-on-one personal relationship with Matthew. There was a big discussion in the HOH room about who to put up as the replacement nominee between everyone in Hot Chocolates, which includes Avery, Kayla, Victoria, Lexus, and Anthony, alongside Bayleigh. Now the 6 of them are in the HOH room and they're hashing it out, and Avery throws out the option of Matthew going up as the replacement nominee, which she already knows that she wants to do because she's already talked about it with the other women, but Kayla in particular says that she's fine with Matthew not going up on the block as long as Lexus and Anthony campaign hard to Matthew that Kayla does not go up on the block, which Anthony and Lexus agree to. Now, this especially rubs Victoria and Bayleigh the wrong way because they perceive that as being flip-floppy. So, in the pool room downstairs, there was a pretty near big blow-up between some of the women. Victoria and Bayleigh were really mad at Kayla for being perceivably flip-floppy and not committing to the plan, while Kayla was justifiably right and mad against Victoria and Bayleigh because they're questioning her loyalties, despite Kayla being the biggest proponent for Matthew to leave the Big Brother house. Personally, I thought that Kayla was just putting up a smokescreen because if Matthew's 2 closest allies in Anthony and Lexus are sitting in the HOH room and you're talking about putting up Matthew as the replacement nominee, of course you're not going to want to seriously entertain the idea in front of them because they're going to panic and they're going to scramble, and that's just going to create more unnecessary chaos. So I thought Kayla was just putting up that smokescreen, but apparently Victoria and Bayleigh didn't see that. Despite Matthew making some emotional pleas to Avery right before the veto ceremony, it was all for naught, as come the veto ceremony, Tola, as expected, uses the power to veto to save himself, and a very tearful Avery nominates Matthew as the replacement nominee. Now, despite a very valiant effort from Anthony to try and campaign to keep Matthew in the house, it was all for naught, as come eviction night, Matthew was evicted in a 4-3 vote, with Anthony, Lexus, and Tola being the only 3 votes to keep him in the house. But before Matthew leaves the house, he shares one final kiss with Lexus before officially becoming the 5th house guest to leave the Big Brother Canada 12 house. Now it's time to get into the power rankings. At number 10, the most recently evicted house guest, I have Matthew. And even though Matthew didn't necessarily have the biggest impact on the game, I was starting to warm up towards Matthew. It seemed like as the game was slowly progressing, Matthew was slowly starting to pick up the game more and more. Or at least we got to see more of Matthew playing the game. I feel like his eviction was an inevitability though because of how big of a perceived physical threat he was going to be. I mean, so far this season, we haven't had any physical competitions except for the first safety competition. So they were bound to have a physical competition of some sort, whether it be like a wall type endurance, maybe it's like some sort of like hanging type thing, but whatever it may be, they were bound for some sort of physical endurance competition, and rightfully so. Everybody thought Matthew was going to crush it because Matthew is an absolute physical specimen. I mean, have you seen the guy? But besides that, Matthew seemed to be a pretty likable guy. He was pretty playable. He wasn't exactly the most riveting TV. He didn't exactly pop off the screen. He didn't exactly jump out of his seat like raring to go with his confessionals or diary room sessions, but he still seemed like a pretty entertaining guy. He seemed like a really genuinely nice guy. And even though he didn't really have a lot to do in the house, he still had his moments. You know, his showmance with Lexus was kind of cute, and it was really nice seeing them get together, especially with how prominent in the preseason and in the beginning Matthew was like, I'm not going to get in a showmance. I'm not even going to entertain it. But it's really nice to see that they're happy together and that they genuinely do love each other, at least for the time being. So that's pretty nice for them. But overall, Matthew didn't really have that big of an impact on the game. With the women coming into power, it was inevitable that Matthew was going to be taken out for being one of the biggest male threats on the other side of the house, which is why Matthew has to remain here at number 10. Now it's time to talk about the house that's actually still in the game. At number 9, the person I believe to be in the worst position in the house is Elijah. And I almost didn't have him at the bottom, but I decided to put him at the bottom because he nearly went home this week. He was literally one vote away from going home. Mind you, I don't think he was ever going to receive that 4th vote to send him home because it was pretty clear that the women really wanted to take a shot at Anthony's side of the house to weaken his numbers. So, in my opinion, I don't think Elijah was ever going to go home despite being the target, but still, he was the initial target. Like, Avery almost made the suboptimal move in targeting Elijah of all people. Like, really? You're going to waste an HOH as critical as this one on Elijah of all people? Like, be so for real right now. He's not a threat to anybody's game, and that's the biggest issue with him. He's making himself not appear as an asset to anybody. He is the most expendable person in the house, and this goes back to what I said in the beginning about Elijah. Him volunteering to go up on the block week 2 under Victoria's HOH was a horrible move because it cemented his position as the perpetual pawn. If you're fine going up on the block 1 week, that means not by your choice, you're probably going to have to go up on the block another week and the week after that. And that's what we've been seeing this entire season. Every chance he's been vulnerable, where he hasn't had some sort of immunity, he's gone up on the block. That doesn't just happen. Like, I know we've had very notable, like, pawn stars before and people who have been on the block as a pawn numerous times, but this early in the game is very, very concerning, and Elijah needs to be doing some active work. But in all honesty, I don't think he can really do anything in this position, which is why I have him here at the bottom. I don't really see any viable path for him to dig himself out of the bottom. The women are so tightly aligned with one another, and with Anthony's side of the house losing a number, the 3 of them are tighter than ever, which just leaves Elijah at the bottom of the house. Even though Elijah wants to align with the women, that's not going to get him anywhere because he's still going to be at the bottom. He could align with Anthony's side, but he doesn't really have any strong connections on that side of the house. And they literally voted to evict him. So all in all, Elijah has nothing going on for him. He really has no close allies. He has no alliances because the one alliance he did have in the directors was clearly fake because they just turned on each other. So obviously, Elijah has no alliances left in the house. He has nobody actively working to keep him in the house, and he's expendable to everyone. He has very little social capital to keep his game afloat, and because of that, I have to put him here at number 9. At number 8, I have Tola. And I almost put Tola at the bottom, but I decided not to because at least he has numbers. Like, at least he has active allies that want to keep him in the game. He has Anthony and he has Lexus. Mind you, that's not a lot of numbers, but it's better than nothing. Like, at least he has people that actively want to keep him in the game. That still doesn't make it any better, but at least people want to work with him. Tola, for a very long time in this game, has been a very prominent target for the women's side of the house. For some reason, Tola just never really gelled with the women. I think it's been established very early on that like Tola just never got along with any of them. I don't know why though, because we never really get any content as to what Tola did necessarily to irritate and upset the women to the point where they absolutely hate his guts and they want him to go home every single week. But he's very clearly, there must have been something wrong to where Tola is like now that prime target for that side of the house. And that's why he is so low. He is the number one target for the women. And we've seen in the past that these women are dominating the competitions. I mean, Avery and Victoria both won an HOH and Kayla won a power veto. So what's to say that they're not going to win another competition? If any of them win a competition, Tola is the number one target. And even though Tola won a veto, we can't necessarily bank on Tola winning another veto after that. Who knows if he would be able to go on a veto streak like Ty from Big Brother Canada 11, or even like Dennis from the beginning of this season. I don't really know if Tola's going to have it in him. I think eventually something is going to slip. Eventually he's going to lose a competition and eventually he's going to go home because he is the number one target for the women's side of the house. The women want him gone. Despite Tola having very little win equity, they want him out of the house. And that is just absolutely horrible for his game. So because of that, I have to keep Tola here at number 8. At number 7, I have Bayleigh. And Bayleigh has been doing some pretty effective work in showing her allegiances to the women. However, I think that's also her detriment in this game because she's literally putting all of her eggs in one basket. Mind you, at this point in the game, it is the winning side of the house, so she is in a pretty solid position, but it's very clear that Bayleigh is on the bottom of the women. Bayleigh hasn't realized that yet, but she is very clearly on the bottom of the women. I mean, she's the only woman not included in the Hot Chocolate Alliance, so it should be pretty prominent to her. Actually, maybe not, but it is pretty prominent that Bayleigh does not have the protection that she thinks she has. She's only like one tier above like Todd in terms of like that side of the house, but even then, Bayleigh has zero connections to the other side of the house. I feel like if somebody like a Tola were to win an HOH, Bayleigh would be up on the block. Despite it not being the optimal move to take Bayleigh out, I think Bayleigh is just such a prominent figurehead for the women's side of the house that she's like primed up as the number one target for Anthony's side of the house. If anybody from Anthony's side of the house wins power, Bayleigh's going to be in a load of trouble. She's going to be in a load of danger, and we've seen that she has been a little bit wavering in terms of her competition performance. So I don't know if she's going to be able to depend on winning a competition. However, the inroads that she's built with the women are very strong, and I think it's her presence that is really unifying and keeping these women together. I think without Bayleigh in the house, I don't think the women's side stays as loyal to each other as they do. But because Bayleigh continuously and persistently reinforces the all-women sentiment, I think she's doing a very good job at uniting them against the bigger threat, at least in their eyes. However, Bayleigh is at the bottom of that totem pole and she doesn't realize that yet, and she might get blindsided sooner rather than later. But with what she has right now, it's pretty solid, but there are definitely some cracks in it, which is why I have her here at number 7. At number 6, I surprisingly have Todd. And I say surprisingly because I was not expecting Todd to really be that much of a gamer, but Mans was gaming this week. He was playing hard. He was strategizing. I don't know if the executive veto, like breathed, whatever the word is, gave him a second win, second life in this game. But after that executive veto, he's been playing this game so much harder. I think the biggest thing that we can compliment Todd in doing this week is how he was able to manipulate Elijah by making it seem like he was the swing vote, despite Victoria actually being the swing vote. Todd was able to guarantee the loyalty of Elijah by telling Elijah, if you stay in this game, you need to stay loyal to me and you are like dependent on me. by Todd essentially reaffirming that to Elijah and then Elijah staying in the house, Elijah is forever indebted to Todd, which is great. Even though Todd isn't going to reciprocate that loyalty, as realistically, Todd is never going to prioritize Elijah, of all people, over the people he has been actively working with in these previous weeks, that is still a great avenue for Todd. If Elijah were to win an HOH, Elijah might have put Todd up on the block, but now that Todd is quote-unquote proven that Elijah needs Todd in this game, there's no way Elijah is ever going to put Todd up on the block. So he essentially just bought himself a brand new ally, even though he isn't going to reciprocate that loyalty. The biggest knock I have against his current position is that it is very clear that he's being used as a meat shield for the women, essentially. Like, if the other side of the house were to win an HOH and Todd was on the block, unfortunately Todd would go home. Or if Todd was just on the block next to any of the women, Todd would most likely go home. He is that big meat shield for them, and I think he recognizes that, but he's still doing very active work to keep himself out of that low tier bottom position. Mind you, he isn't climbing the ranks within the women's side of the alliance anytime soon, because how can he really? The only really inroad he has is like Bayleigh, but like Bayleigh's already in a pretty poor position in terms of that, so I don't think Todd can really build off of that. But Todd is doing an amazing job in terms of really building these connections outside of that side of the house. And if he can continue to do that, he may find himself in a swing vote position where he can swing between sticking with like Victoria's side of the house or flipping to give Anthony's side a chance. He has options, and if he can recognize that and act on them, he's going to be in a phenomenal position. So because of that potential he has, I have to put Todd here at number 6. At number 5, I have Anthony. And Anthony's game took a huge blow this week. Losing Matthew was an absolutely horrible thing for Anthony's game because of how big of an ally and a shield Matthew was for him. Now with Matthew out of the house, there's no longer like a solid duo that can get put up. If Bayleigh were to win an HOH, Bayleigh was initially going to put up Tola and Matthew, but with Matthew out of the house, who is Bayleigh going to put up? Tola and Anthony. And that could be concerning because what if Tola wins a veto? And now Anthony is forced to sit on the block next to somebody that he might go home against. So as it stands right now, Anthony is in a very vulnerable position. However, the reason why I have him so high is because he still has those solid inroads. Even though his side of the house is losing the war currently, he still has all of the solid inroads he has with the people on the other side of the house. He still has the Hot Chocolate Alliance to a certain extent. Even though they've technically like turned on each other, they haven't really, because they're still trying to work with each other and they're still trying to get to the final 5 with one another. So I wouldn't really say that they've turned on each other, but they're more so distancing themselves from one another. But Anthony still has those connects. Anthony still has a pretty solid relationship with Kayla. Anthony still has a solid relationship with Avery, and Anthony is Victoria's number 1. So even though Anthony's side of the house is in pretty apparent danger, I don't think Anthony himself is in that big of danger, which is a pretty big plus side to his game. The only issue I see is those very extraneous circumstances where the wrong people win the wrong competitions at the wrong time, and he would be screwed out of the game in that sense. But those are very extraneous circumstances, to say the least. So even though there are those flaws in this game, he still has great solid positioning and social bonds with the correct people. So because of that, I have to put Anthony here at number 5. At number 4, I have Lexus. And losing Matthew was a huge blow to Lexus's game. Possibly even more so to Lexus's game than to Anthony's game, because Lexus was literally Matthew's showmance. Like, Matthew and Lexus were each other's number 1s, and now that Lexus has lost her number 1, she should be in a very vulnerable position. However, she isn't. She's been able to successfully flip back over to the women's side of the house and realign herself with them, so now she's no longer in that apparent danger. She's no longer being associated with Anthony's side of the house, technically speaking. Even though Lexus does still have that loyalty to Anthony, she's no longer heavily associating herself with Anthony's side of the house. She's really putting herself back with the women. Even though she recognizes that she's most likely on the bottom of the women, she's still maintaining like the solid social repertoire with that side of the house and saying that she is still rocking with them and still wanting to align herself with them. So she's doing great work in that sense. all in all, it seems like Lexus has her bases covered for basically the entire house. I don't really see any circumstance in which Lexus would go up on the block anytime soon. So Lexus has that going for her. However, I think the big issue is that she's nobody's top priority as it stands right now. When she had Matthew in the house, Matthew was her number one priority and vice versa. But now that Matthew's gone, Lexus really isn't like at the number one of anybody's list. She may be like the number two or number three, but she's not anybody's number one. And that does concern me. I think she's going to have to do a little bit more work solidifying some bonds to really build trust and to really prop herself up as people's most optimal ally. And I think if she can do that, which I fully believe that she's capable of doing, I think she'll be able to improve her position heavily. But because she hasn't been able to do that yet, and she isn't anybody's top priority as of right now, I have to put Lexus here at number 4. At number 3, I have Kayla. And Kayla's in a bit of an interesting position. Even though it's very clear that she's like at the top of the house, it's very clear that there is a very strong trio controlling the game in Avery, Kayla, and Victoria. But Kayla is slowly starting to lose that solid positioning more and more. We're starting to see that she is slowly emerging as a bigger and bigger target. Even though Matthew threw her name out there, nobody was ever really considering Kayla as a big threat. However, with Matthew now leaving the house, people are starting to consider Kayla as a bigger and bigger threat. Adding on to that, the really stupid fight in the pool room, which I just need to say, like, it was absolutely, like, how could you get mad at Kayla? It was so obvious that Kayla was just putting up a smokescreen. Kayla, more than anybody, wanted Matthew to go. So why would Kayla be resolute in not putting Matthew up? She wouldn't. It was just her playing smart, and it just shows how much social intelligence Kayla has. She's recognizing that Matthew's two biggest allies in Anthony and Lexus are in the room. So why would she be so prominent and being like, yeah, let's put Matthew up, let's send him out? Like, no, that's going to ring some alarm bells, and that's going to sow more and more mistrust. So realistically, Kayla did the right thing in being like, you know what, maybe it's not the best move to put up Matthew. You know, if y'all don't want Matthew up, I'm completely fine with it, despite her not being fine. Like, in terms of maintaining her social status with the other side of the house and Anthony's side, I think she did perfectly. However, Victoria and Bayleigh didn't see it that way, and because Victoria is currently in the position of power that she has right now, she has the most influence over basically the entire house. So now that she's getting bad vibes from Kayla, everybody's getting bad vibes from Kayla, and that is slowly starting to dwindle and diminish her social capital. I think she really needs to re-solidify her bond with Victoria. If she can do that and put herself back in that prime position where Victoria trusts her 100%, I think Kayla's going to be back to being in a great position. I think she's going to be able to take over Avery in terms of being Victoria's number one, and that's just going to propel her further and further into the game. And we've seen now that Kayla can do pretty well in these physical competitions. So Kayla has a lot of potential going for her. It's just a matter of her capitalizing on it and making sure that she doesn't get caught in anybody's crosshairs in terms of like a misfire. So because of all of that positivity, I have to put Kayla here at number 3. At number 2, I have Avery. And Avery's HOH actually went pretty well. I might argue that Avery had one of, if not the best HOHs of the season thus far. She made a huge move, and it didn't really require her to get that much blood on her hands. Even coming out of this HOH, nobody is actively targeting Avery as like a primary target. Like, I haven't really seen somebody like a Tola saying, if I win HOH, I'm targeting Avery. You know, the only person who was really targeting Avery was Matthew, and Matthew's out of the house, so that doesn't even really matter. Avery making this huge move to take out Matt is really going to boost her resume, but the downside of her making this big move and it going successfully is that it's continuing to fuel her ego. We've seen in these previous weeks that Avery has felt pretty safe in this position because of her relationship with Victoria, because of her position within the Hot Chocolates, because of her position with the women. She's felt very, very safe. And because of that, she's built up a bit of an ego where she's become a little bit more chillax and a little too comfortable for my liking, which maybe that's contributing to why I'm starting to really not like Avery that much. But that cockiness is really going to get to her in the end. If she continues to loosen up and chillax and really take a back seat, then she's going to get sniped out of this game way before she even expects it. Like, if she gets too content in like her position and she becomes too relaxed and too comfortable, she could very easily be blindsided. People can easily get put off by that by saying, look at how comfortable she is, we need to take her out now, and then she's a number one target. So Avery definitely needs to check her ego in that sense, and if she can do that, I think she'll be able to maintain her solid position. But with her making this huge move, like, it's undeniably a huge move, taking Matthew out of this game in a back door, might I add. Like, it's a huge move taking him out, not only, but like in this way. So that's obviously going to boost her chances of being successful in this game. It's just going to be a matter of her keeping that ego in check, because if she doesn't, her social capital is going to dwindle. She's going to lose those solid bonds she has, and she's going to get taken out sooner rather than later. So as long as she doesn't spiral in that sense, she should be fine, which is why I have her here at number 2. At number 1, the person I believe to be in the best position in the house is still Victoria. I know I was joking in the beginning. I'm saying like, oh, haha, the cast was rigged. Oh, this game was rigged for Victoria to win. Obviously, I don't believe the game is rigged in like any sense, but like, it's pretty apparent that this cast was built for Victoria. Like, this is a cast that heavily favors Victoria. I mean, she comes into this game with an all-star that she is very close friends with outside of the game, and she has all of these very strong women who have this very strong all-women sentiment that they want to get all of the women to the end and ensure that a woman wins. So Victoria has a lot of good things going for her, but it's not just that. She's continually doing very good social work. We saw this week that she's really solidified a bond with Todd, of all people. Like, really? Todd? Like, no one would have ever expected Victoria and Todd to be closely aligned, but now Todd considers Victoria as like his top 3. Like himself, Bayleigh, and Victoria. Like, that's very impressive work, and Victoria's putting in the very solid social work. Like, she is putting in the hours in building up these relationships, and it's paying off beautifully. Victoria was somehow the swing vote this week. Even though Victoria was one of the most locked votes to get Matthew out of the house, everybody in the house perceived Victoria as the swing vote, which just proves to show how good of the relationships she built in this game are. If everybody in the house trusts her and is looking to her for her vote, like, that's very impressive. Like, she is in a huge power position. Even though, like, she is leading her side of the house, the other side of the house still trusts her, and that's crazy. Like, Tola trusts her. Like, Tola got HouseGuest choice for the power veto, and he could have chosen Anthony, you know, to guarantee that like somebody on his side of the house was competing with him, but he chose Victoria because he believed that Victoria was on his side, which is crazy to me. Like, it should be pretty clear that Victoria isn't on Tola's side, but Tola genuinely believes that Victoria is on his side, which is just kudos to how well Victoria is playing this game right now. Obviously, she's still messy, she's still chaotic, she still has her outbursts because, come on, she's still Spicy V. She doesn't call herself Spicy V for being mild. She's obviously going to cause chaos in some sense, but the work she's putting in right now is very, very effective, and it is paying off in dividends. And if she can continue to maintain this momentum, she is going to be coasting to a very easy win, which is why I have her here at number 1. Overall, this week felt kind of stagnant in its gameplay. Despite a huge move being made and the line finally being drawn in the sand, it felt like a pretty unentertaining and a pretty blah week of Big Brother Canada. Even though like the previous weeks had pretty unpredictable results, this week actually had a pretty predictable result. Everybody knew that the women were going to stick together, and everybody knew that Elijah was just going to be the pawn to take out the bigger male threats in either Tola or Matthew. And it just so happened to be a backdoor of Matthew, which is kind of funny if you think about it, because Matthew was propped up to be such a big threat, and for him to be taken out in this very ceremonial fashion, but that still didn't somehow get as much attention as it should have in such a boring week. It's kind of that juxtaposition that makes his eviction a bit like, it's a bit ironic or a bit funny in like an ironic sense. I feel like this season is starting to come to a bit of a slowdown, with the lines being so clearly divided between Victoria's side and Anthony's side. It's very apparent which side is going to be taking shots at one another. Hopefully this doesn't turn into just all the women winning all the competitions and steamrolling, because even if it is the women steamrolling, I still don't personally like watching steamrolls because they're kind of boring. I want to see the power shift. I want to see how these dynamics change when underdogs come into power. Like if Elijah were to win an HOH, he could cause some serious chaos. Is he going to? Most likely not, because he's loyal to Todd and Todd is loyal to the women. So obviously I don't think anything in that sense is going to happen, but I just want to see some chaos happen. I want to see some drama. I want to see a flip of some sort. I just want something exciting to happen. That might be like the chaos in me speaking, but I just really want something entertaining to happen. I hope that this doesn't just become a Victoria steamroll to the end, as even though I'm very impressed with her gameplay, that still wouldn't be very entertaining to watch. Even though it is Victoria, gameplay wise, I just don't want things to remain stagnant. And I hope that this season doesn't come down to an absolute drag. And I just hope it doesn't come down to an absolute halt. But those are just my thoughts. Leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share with your friends if you have any of those, and I'll see you all in the next video. Peace.